Margaret, Richard, Claire, Cynthia, Bob. The silence in our sprawling suburban house wasn't the comfortable quiet of shared lives anymore. It had become heavy, thick with unspoken resentments, with the vast, unbridgeable miles that had quietly, insidiously grown between Richard and me over 40 years of marriage. 40 years. You build a life brick by painstaking brick. Mortgage payments, school runs, orthodontist appointments, college applications. You raise a child, watch them build their own life. You create routines so ingrained they feel like breathing. His Tuesday golf game, my Friday gardening club, Sunday dinners that had slowly dwindled from lively family affairs to tense, quiet meals for two. You assume you know the person sleeping beside you, the familiar rise and fall of their chest, the specific way they sigh just before drifting off. You assume the foundation built over decades is solid bedrock, until one day a stray dismissive comment, a curiously locked file cabinet he never used before, a suddenly planned fishing trip makes you tap the walls and realize the entire structure might be hollowed out, riddled with the insidious rot of secrets and lies. I'd Margaret, Maggie to the few friends I still kept close. After Richard's subtle discouragement of most social ties that didn't revolve around him or his business. 68 years old, a life spent largely in Richard's shadow. Precho, my own early aspirations quietly shelved. Richard, my husband, 71. Meticulous Richard. Precise Richard. Always in control. Especially obsessively with money. He balanced our checkbook to the penny, scrutinized every credit card statement, lectured me mildly if the grocery bill seemed $5 higher than usual. Our daughter, Claire, a bright, capable woman I adored, lived nearby, juggling her own demanding career, marriage, and two energetic teenagers. She tried to stay connected, but she was busy. And Richard didn't encourage closeness, not really. Our life, his and mine, had supposedly settled into that quiet, predictable rhythm of comfortable retirement, tending my beloved roses for me, endless rounds of golf and mysterious, vaguely defined consulting projects for him. Consulting. Funny how that word could cover so much. The inciting crack, the first tremor that hinted at the rotten foundation, appeared subtly, almost innocuously. It was the week of our 40th anniversary. 40 years, a milestone by any measure. I, perhaps foolishly, perhaps clinging to the ghost of the man I married, envisioned a quiet celebration. Not a party, heavens no. Richard abhorred fuss, a nod to where we started. I mentioned it casually over breakfast, placing his perfectly brewed coffee beside his Wall Street Journal. Anniversary? Richard looked up, his reading glasses perched on his nose, a faint, almost imperceptible frown creasing his usually smooth brow. The frown wasn't surprise, I realized later. It was annoyance. Is that this week? He knew perfectly well it was. I'd marked it on the kitchen calendar weeks ago, the one he consulted every morning. Yes, Richard, Friday. My voice was carefully neutral. Years of practice. He waved a dismissive hand, the gesture curt, final, already turning back to the stock market pages. Ah, can't do Friday. Impossible. Got that fishing trip planned with Bob Henderson. Long weekend up at the lake. You know Bob. Great fellow, been planning this for months. Bob Henderson? My mind went blank. I searched the carefully catalogued index of Richard's acquaintances, colleagues, golf buddies. No Bob Henderson existed, certainly not one he fished with. Richard hated fishing. He considered it inefficient, massive. He usually went golfing alone or claimed meetings or, increasingly, just disappeared for entire days on vague consulting errands. A tiny alarm bell, faint but clear, chimed somewhere deep inside me, a warning signal I'd learned, disastrously, to ignore over the years. But decades of smoothing things over, of avoiding confrontation, of making myself smaller to accommodate his moods, kicked in automatically. Don't rock the boat, Maggie. Don't make a fuss. Oh, I said, keeping my voice light, even, the practiced ease of marital diplomacy. All right, then. A fishing trip sounds relaxing. Maybe we can celebrate when you get back. Yes, perhaps, he mumbled, not looking up, already absorbed again behind the impenetrable wall of the financial pages. No apology, no acknowledgement of the milestone we were supposed to be sharing, not even a flicker of regret. Just dismissal. Another heavy layer of invisibility draped over my shoulders, suffocating me slowly. It wasn't just the forgotten, or rather, deliberately ignored anniversary. It was the way he dismissed it, the breathtaking ease of the lie about Bob Henderson, the complete, utter lack of regard for my feelings, for our shared history. Later that day, drawn by the low murmur of his voice, I paused outside his study, the heavy oak door slightly ajar. He was on the phone, his tone slush business manner. No, absolutely essential I settle the final accounts then, he was saying, an unfamiliar edge of tension in his voice. Yes, the usual arrangements. Imperative we make sure M is comfortable. Minimum fuss, understand. Me? Mao? Me? Margaret? Comfortable how? Drugged? Compliant? And why minimum fuss? It sounded cold, chillingly transactional, like settling an estate, disposing of an inconvenient asset, not planning a fishing trip. My heart began a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. When he emerged moments later, adjusting his tie, his face smoothed back into its usual impassive mask, I asked, my voice betraying never the sudden share gripping me. Everything all right, dear? Sounded serious. Just coordinating trip details, Maggie, he said smoothly, patting my shoulder with that infuriatingly condescending gesture. Logistics, nothing for you to worry your pretty little head about. He smiled, a thin, bloodless curve of the lips. Don't worry your pretty little head. How many times, over 40 years, had I heard that exact phrase, his standard deflection whenever finances, investments, or anything remotely complex came up. For years I'd accepted it, convincing myself it was protective, that he was shielding me from burdens. He was the expert, after all, the financial wizard. I managed the household budget he allocated, clipped coupons, turned leftovers into new meals, while he managed the important things, the stocks, the bonds, the future I assumed was secure. But now, hearing those words after the overheard call, they felt less like protection and more like confinement, a gilded cage, keeping me comfortable, keeping me quiet, keeping me deliberately, dangerously ignorant. That night sleep was impossible. While Richard slept soundly beside me, the deep, untroubled sleep of a man whose conscience apparently didn't bother him, I lay rigid, staring into the darkness, the phrase settle the final accounts echoing, morphing into something sinister. Accounts. What accounts was he settling on a fishing trip? And why did ensuring my comfort involve minimum fuss? The implications were terrifying. Richard was meticulous, almost pathologically organized. He kept everything related to our significant finances locked away, either physically in his heavy, old-fashioned filing cabinet in the study, the key to which I hadn't seen in years, or digitally on his home office computer. the powerful machine he guarded jealously, protected by passwords he never shared. He'd given me access to the joint checking and the household savings accounts, of course, enough for groceries and bills, but the real money, the investments, the retirement portfolio built over 40 years, that was strictly his domain. Too complex, Maggie, he'd say with that dismissive little smile. Charts, projections, market volatility. Better I handle it. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor. Lying there in the dark, a different thought surfaced, cold and sharp. Was his obsession with control not about prudence, but about hiding something? Hiding incompetence? Hiding losses? Hiding worse? The next day, a Saturday, while he was out for his usual lengthy pre-trip golf game, 9 holes that somehow always took 5 hours, I felt an unfamiliar surge of defiance rise within me, fueled by sleeplessness and simmering fear. I couldn't shake the unease. I had to know. But the old computer, the beige behemoth he'd replaced years ago but never discarded, sat on a side desk, ostensibly defunct, serving mainly as a resting place for dusty stacks of old financial journals. He probably assumed it was broken, or that I wouldn't know how to use it even if it worked. On a whim, driven by a desperate need for answers, I pressed the power button. It whirred to life, a slow protesting groan, the fan rattling but undeniably functional. My hands trembled. It wasn't password protected at the startup screen. He must have deemed it too old, too irrelevant to bother securing. Relief warred with apprehension. My fingers, clumsy on the unfamiliar keyboard, navigated the outdated operating system. It felt like archaeology, digging through layers of digital dust, files upon files of old client data, market analyses, presentations, evidence of the successful career he presented to the world. Then I saw it, tucked away in a miscellaneous labeled folder, almost hidden, a subfolder simply labeled Ledger. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I felt faint. This felt deeply wrong, a violation of the privacy we'd always, despite the distance between us, nominally maintained. Inside a single password-protected spreadsheet file, ledger_personal_master, my stomach clenched. Dead end. My limited computer skills wouldn't get me past a password. Defeat washed over me. Then I remembered Richard's meticulous nature, but also his strange predictability when it came to security he deemed unimportant. Passwords weren't his strong suit for things he considered trivial. He reused them, usually something simple, something meaningful only to him. What would he use for something personal, hidden away on an old machine? Our anniversary? No, he'd just forgotten it. Claire's birthday? Maybe. I tried it, adding his birth year as he sometimes did. Access denied. Think, Maggie. Think like Richard. Meticulous, ordered, sentimental about strange things. What mattered to him before me, before Claire, before the life he presented to the world. His childhood dog, Skipper, a golden retriever he'd adored, whose framed photo still sat, oddly, on his private bookshelf. It seemed absurd, too simple, but I typed it in, adding the year the dog had died, a date he'd mentioned once, long ago, SKIP. The cursor blinked, then access granted. The spreadsheet opened, filling the screen, columns of dates, numbers, cryptic notes stretching back. Not just years, but decades. Almost 30 years. My breath caught. It wasn't client accounts. It looked intensely personal. My eyes scanned the entries, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. Withdrawals. Large ones. Frighteningly large, regular ones. transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, numbered accounts, accounts with names like Churchill Downs, and the notes, terse, chilling shorthand. Monaco trip, recoup attempt, fail. Vegas shortfall, covered via secondary loan. Belmont stakes, major loss. Need liquidity ASAP. Online poker sites, 3. Shelling, Christmas Hill, Tennessee short peats of TCG, AFCXO. Collections, TCG. And then I saw the balances section, hidden tabs at the bottom, savings accounts drained, lines of credit maxed out, retirement funds savagely depleted, complex transactions apparently designed to hide the true staggering losses, investments showing catastrophic failures. It wasn't a ledger of success. It was a meticulously documented secret chronicle of catastrophic financial ruin, decades of it. Hidden beneath the veneer of his success, his control, his condescending expertise, Richard hadn't been building our future. He'd been systematically, secretly, gambling it away. My meticulous, controlled husband was a high-stakes gambler, and we were apparently broke. The screen glowed with the chilling arithmetic of our ruined life. Vegas, Monaco, Belmont Stakes, Churchill Downs, names that flickered like neon signs illuminating a landscape of deceit. The fishing trips, the long weekends away, the late nights consulting, not fishing. It was gambling, a secret, corrosive addiction spanning decades, relentlessly bleeding our security dry while I, his trusting wife, his household manager, meticulously budgeted the allowance he doled out, blissfully, stupidly unaware of the financial inferno raging just beneath the surface. Nausea rose thick and bitter in my throat. 40 years of trust, of shared life, of believing in the solid foundation he presented, evaporated in the cold blue light of the monitor. His obsessive control over the finances wasn't prudence. It was a desperate, frantic measure to hide the hemorrhage, to maintain the illusion of stability. His emotional distance, his dismissiveness, his refusal to discuss money matters. It wasn't just his reserved nature. It was the crushing weight of shame, of a secret life built on risk and ruin, a life he couldn't bear to reveal. Every dismissal, every condescending pat on the head, every time he told me not to worry my pretty little head about money, it was a deliberate lie, a carefully placed brick in the wall designed to keep me from discovering the abyss he'd dragged us, unknowingly, toward. My trembling finger scrolled further back, deeper into the digital tomb of our finances. The gambling started subtly, almost innocuously, 25, nearly 30 years ago. Small amounts at first, recorded almost casually, justified perhaps as entertainment, a little flutter. But the pattern was unmistakable. It escalated. Losses mounted, followed inevitably by bigger, more reckless bets, desperate, irrational attempts to recoup, to chase the elusive win that would make it all right again. There were notations of loans taken out from sources I didn't recognize, repaid quickly at first, then larger loans, notations hinting at exorbitant interest rates, at shadowy lenders. He'd been juggling debts, hiding losses, performing a terrifying high-wire act to maintain the facade of the successful, prudent financial advisor, while secretly drowning in a sea of his own making. And the retirement funds, the nest egg I believed was securing our future, the reward for his long career and my decades of support. It was drastically, horrifyingly depleted. What he told me was there, The comfortable figures he occasionally mentioned with quiet satisfaction was a complete fiction, a lie. The reality staring back at me from the spreadsheet was terrifyingly precarious. Settle the final accounts. Make sure M is comfortable. The phrases slammed back into my consciousness with brutal clarity. It wasn't about me, Margaret. It was about the money. About the mortgage, perhaps. About the debts. He was likely heading off on this fishing trip not to relax, not to see imaginary Bob Henderson, but to make one last desperate play, one final Hail Mary bet to fix the unfixable mess. A trip to Atlantic City funded by what? More borrowed money? The last dregs of some hidden account? Or perhaps, chillingly, he was going to meet someone he owed. Someone who wouldn't accept excuses, someone to whom he needed to settle a debt in a way I couldn't even bear to imagine. What happens when a desperate gambler runs out of road? My mind flashed back, replaying decades through this new, horrifying lens. The unexplained tension before big trips. Just finalizing a deal, Maggie. The occasional frantic phone calls he took in hushed tones, pacing the study, difficult client, the way he sometimes flinched, almost imperceptibly, when unexpected bills arrived in the mail. Damn inflation. The sudden insistence years ago that we refinance the house for a better rate, pulling out equity I now suspected vanished into the ether of his addiction. I had attributed it all to work stress, to his meticulous nature, to the pressures of his demanding career. How blind I had been. How willingly, culpably blind, perhaps. I had accepted his explanations, accepted his control because it was easier than questioning, easier than confronting the subtle signs that something was deeply wrong. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. But I quickly, frantically photographed key pages of the ledger, the summary balances, the recent large withdrawals, the notations of debts. The images blurred slightly with my trembling. I logged out, shut down the old computer, wiped away any trace of my presence with a cloth I found on the desk. My reflection stared back from the blank screen. A pale, frightened woman who felt like a spy in her own home, a stranger uncovering the wreckage of a life she thought she knew. The scent of leather and old paper in the study now seemed cloying, the smell of decay, of secrets festering in the dark. When Richard returned from golfing later that morning, whistling cheerfully, radiating the smug satisfaction of a good round, I could barely look at him. The contrast between his casual demeanor and the abyss I had just glimpsed was grotesque. The man preparing for his fishing trip wasn't my husband. He was a desperate, addicted gambler heading towards a cliff, and he was planning to take our entire shared history, our security, our future, over the edge with him. "Everything all right, Maggie?" he asked, noticing my pallor, my forced stillness as I stood by the kitchen window, pretending to admire the roses. "You look a bit peaked. Coming down with something?" "Just tired," I mumbled, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster across my face. "Didn't sleep well. Maybe I'll have an early night." "Good idea," he said easily, already turning his attention to meticulously sorting his expensive fishing gear. Lures, rods, waterproof bags, all the paraphernalia needed for his elaborate lie. "Get some rest. You've seemed forgetful lately. Need to take better care of yourself." The gaslighting. Again, so casual, so practiced. But this time, it didn't make me doubt myself. It ignited a cold, hard fury deep within my chest. He wasn't just hiding his addiction. He was actively, cruelly trying to undermine my reality to protect his catastrophic secrets. That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't reach. The betrayal was a physical ache, a tightness in my chest that made breathing difficult. It wasn't just the money, though God knows that was devastating enough. It was the decades of lies, the stolen intimacy, the utter lack of trust, the knowledge that the man sleeping peacefully beside me was a stranger, consumed by a secret that had defined and warped our entire marriage. What would happen when the money finally ran out completely, when the juggling act failed? What was his endgame? Did he even have one, beyond the next bet? And Claire, our daughter, the thought returned, sharper this time. Did she know? Her comment about him being worried about money suddenly seemed less innocent, more loaded. Had he confided in her, burdened her with his secret, or worse, manipulated her into helping him cover it up somehow? The thought that he might have dragged her into this made her complicit, filled me with a new wave of protective dread. I knew I couldn't let him go on this trip, not without knowing the truth, not without confronting the lies head on. But how? Accusing him directly, here, now, would lead to denial, rage, more gaslighting. He was a master manipulator, skilled at twisting words, turning blame. He'd make me feel foolish, paranoid, crazy. I needed proof he couldn't deny, undeniable proof, proof of where he was really going, what he was really doing. The next morning, my plan, desperate, reckless, formed. As he loaded his expensive fishing gear into the trunk of his polished sedan, I waited until the last bag was in. Then, clutching my chest, I leaned against the door frame, feigning a sudden wave of dizziness, a shortness of breath. "Richard, I don't feel well," I stammered, pressing a hand dramatically to my forehead, suddenly feeling quite faint. Maybe you shouldn't go, just for today?" He hesitated, turning from the car, his keys jingling in his hand. Annoyance flickered plainly in his eyes before being instantly masked by practiced, solicitous concern. "Nonsense, Maggie. You just need rest. Probably just stressed about me being away. I'll only be gone a few days, home Sunday night. Bob Henderson is expecting me. Can't let him down." Bob Henderson, the imaginary friend. The lie slid off his tongue with insulting ease. "All right," I said weakly, allowing him to help me back inside to the sofa. "Just be careful driving." "Always am," he said, giving my shoulder a quick, dismissive squeeze before heading purposefully out the door. The decisive click echoed in the silent house. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I sprang into action, the feigned dizziness vanishing instantly, replaced by adrenaline. I grabbed my purse, my phone, stuffing a spare charger and a bottle of water inside. I ran out the front door and hailed the first passing cab. "Follow that silver sedan," I told the startled driver, pointing towards Richard's rapidly retreating car. "The one just turning the corner. But stay back, way back. Don't let him see us." The driver, a young man with tired eyes, raised an eyebrow but nodded, pulling smoothly away from the curb. "Having second thoughts, ma'am? Or catching him red-handed?" "Something like that," I muttered, my eyes fixed intently on Richard's car weaving through the morning traffic. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This felt reckless, impulsive, like something out of a cheap detective novel. But I had to know. Where was he really going? What accounts was he really intending to settle? The quiet life I knew had shattered. Now I had to pick through the pieces and find the truth, no matter how ugly. The drive unfolded like a slow-moving chase scene in a movie I never wanted to star in. We trailed Richard's silver sedan through the familiar suburban streets, onto the sprawling highway heading north, then, crucially, veering east, away from any lakes or forested areas I knew, away from the plausible geography of a fishing trip. My stomach churned with a sickening cocktail of dread and adrenaline. Every mile marker felt like a nail driving deeper into the coffin of my marriage. Where was he leading me? The suspense was agonizing. After nearly 2 relentless hours on the road, the landscape changing from green suburbs to the flat, scrubby outskirts that signaled the approach to the coast, he exited the highway. He turned onto smaller state roads, the signs now openly proclaiming the distance to Atlantic City. Of course, the glaringly obvious, insultingly cliched destination, not a fishing trip to commune with nature. The lies weren't just lies, they were lazy, contemptuous lies, built on his assumption of my ignorance, my passivity. He pulled smoothly into the gleaming, ostentatious parking garage of the Golden Nugget Casino, a monument to manufactured luck and desperate hope. I instructed the cab driver to pull over across the street, finding a spot where we had a clear, unobstructed view of the main entrance and valet area. "Wait here," I told him again, pressing another $100 bill into his hand. "I don't know how long this will take. Keep the meter running." He pocketed the bill with a nod, settling back. "Whatever you say, lady, your dime." I watched, my breath held tight in my chest, as Richard got out of his car. He wasn't carrying fishing gear naturally. He retrieved a sleek, expensive-looking black leather duffel bag from the trunk. A bag I'd never seen before, stringing it over his shoulder with practiced ease. He looked different here, stripped of his suburban camouflage, not like my reserved, meticulous, slightly boring husband, but like someone else entirely, someone tense, wired, his eyes scanning the surroundings with furtive, almost paranoid glances before he straightened his tie and disappeared through the casino's revolving glass doors, swallowed by the artificial glitter within. My mind raced, frantic. What was in that bag? Cash? Chips? Documents? Was he here purely to gamble, to chase his losses with the last of our money? Or was he here to meet someone? Settle a debt with a loan shark? The phrase "settle the final accounts" could mean so many things, none of them good. I needed to get inside, find out what he was doing, but charging in would be disastrous. He'd see me, clam up, perhaps even flee. I needed a plan, a way to observe without being observed. My first call was to Claire. I quickly explained where I was, what I'd seen. Her initial reaction was stunned disbelief, quickly followed by a wave of horrified understanding as the pieces clicked into place for her, too. "Mom, are you serious? Dad, he's actually at a casino? In Atlantic City?" Her voice was shaky, laced with anger and fear. All this time, the money worries he mentioned, the consulting trips, it wasn't just work stress? "I don't think so, honey. Based on what I found in that ledger, I think it's much, much worse." I quickly outlined my discovery, the decades of gambling, the depleted accounts, the blatant lie about the fishing trip. Claire was silent for a long, heavy moment. I could hear her breathing raggedly on the other end. Then her voice hardened, acquiring a steely edge I recognized from her challenging career. "Okay, Mom." "Okay." He lied. To both of us. For years. "Right. What do you need me to do?" Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. She believed me. She wasn't making excuses for him. She was on my side. "I need to know what he's doing in there, Claire. Who he might be meeting. What's in that duffel bag? But I can't go in like this. He'll spot me instantly. Right, Claire said again, her mind clearly working fast. Okay, stay put. I have an idea. Remember my college friend, Sarah Jenkins, her brother Mike? He works security at the Golden Nugget, head of surveillance, I think. Let me call Sarah, see if she can reach him. Maybe he can keep an eye out discreetly. Find out which room your dad checked into. Maybe see who comes and goes from his suite. It felt like a desperate long shot, relying on a chain of acquaintances, but it was infinitely better than sitting here helpless or blundering in blind while Claire made calls. I sat rigidly in the back of the cab, my gaze fixed on the casino entrance, watching the endless stream of people chasing fortunes, oblivious to the personal drama unfolding just across the street. My heart pounded a slow, heavy rhythm of dread. An agonizing hour later, Claire called back, her voice tight with suppressed excitement. Okay, Mom, success. Sarah reached Mike. He remembers Dad from some corporate event years ago. He said Dad checked into a high-roller suite on the 35th floor, paid cash up front for 3 nights. Cash, Mom. Mike said that's unusual unless you're trying to stay off the grid. He's going to keep an eye on the elevator cameras for that floor, see if anyone specific goes up to his suite. The high-roller floor, paid cash. This wasn't a casual weekend getaway, a simple relapse. This felt bigger, more desperate, more planned. What was he playing at? Another hour crawled by, each minute stretching into an eternity. The artificial lights of the casino began to blaze against the deepening twilight sky. Then Claire called again, her voice sharp, tight with urgency. Mom, Mike just saw someone go up to Dad's floor, a woman. He didn't recognize her immediately, but he got a decent look at her face on the camera feed when she stopped to check her makeup in the elevator mirror. A pregnant pause. Mom? Mike is almost certain it was Cynthia. Cynthia, Richard's much younger sister, or rather his half-sister, the product, I'd always been told, of his father's brief, regrettable affair late in life, a secret acknowledged only after his father's death. Cynthia had always been kept at arm's length by Richard, treated more as a vaguely embarrassing poor relation than as true family. Richard occasionally sent her money, small amounts, he always implied, complaining sotto voce about her irresponsibility, her constant need for bailouts, her inability to hold down a job. I had always felt a distant sympathy for her, trapped in the shadow of our family's success. What on earth was she doing here, meeting Richard in secret at a high-roller suite in an Atlantic City casino? Mike said she looked extremely nervous, Claire continued, her voice barely a whisper now. Clutching her purse like her life depended on it, she didn't look around, just went straight down the hall towards Dad's suite. My mind reeled, struggling to connect the dots. Cynthia? Why her? Was Richard giving her money from his gambling winnings, or more likely his losses? Was she hitting him up for another bailout, or was she somehow involved? The phrase settled the final accounts echoed again, disturbingly. Was Cynthia the account? Then, another piece clicked into place with sickening force, the hidden ledger. Those regular monthly withdrawals over decades, always the same amount, transferred electronically to an account under her name. They weren't small amounts, they were substantial. Why? What hold did she have over him? What secret bound them together that required decades of silent, significant financial support? Suddenly, the years of Richard's suffocating financial control, his obsessive secrecy, his cool emotional distance took on a new, potentially darker, more complex meaning. Was he just hiding a gambling habit? Or was he hiding something with Cynthia? Something bigger than just addiction? Claire, I said, my voice low, urgent, fueled by a terrifying new suspicion. I need you to do something else. Right now. That old metal box of your grandfather's personal papers, the one tucked away in the back of the attic closet. I need you to go up there and look through it. Carefully. Look for anything related to Cynthia, anything about her mother, anything mentioning secrets or obligations, maybe from around the time Richard was in college, or maybe just after his father passed away. Mom, what are you thinking? Claire sounded scared now. I don't know yet, honey, I said grimly, but I have a terrible, terrible feeling this isn't just about gambling anymore. There's another secret here, and I think Cynthia is the key. While Claire searched frantically back home through dusty boxes filled with the ghosts of the past, I waited in the deepening darkness outside the casino, the pieces swirling in my mind, forming a disturbing, incomplete, terrifying picture. What secret connected Richard and Cynthia? Why the decades of secret payments? Why meet now, like thieves in the night, in a casino suite under the guise of a fishing trip? The hours ticked by, marked only by the changing shifts of the casino valets and the rhythmic blinking of the neon signs. The cab driver occasionally glanced back at me, a question in his eyes, but said nothing. Finally, close to midnight, my phone rang. Claire. Her voice was shaking so badly she could barely speak. Mom. Oh, Mom. I found it. Letters. Bundled together, hidden inside Grandpa's old university textbook. Letters between him and Cynthia's mother. Her breath hitched, a sob catching in her throat. Mom? Cynthia isn't Dad's half-sister. She was never Grandpa's daughter. Another sob. She's his... Oh, God. Mom? She's his daughter. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. The world tilted, the glittering facade of the casino blurring into meaningless streaks of light. Cynthia wasn't his half-sister. She was his daughter? Richard's daughter? A daughter born from an affair he had. When? Before me? During our marriage? The timeline scrambled in my head, refusing to focus. Claire's voice, trembling and thick with tears, continued haltingly on the other end of the line, reading snippets from the yellowed pages. The letters. Mom, they're not from Grandpa. They're from Dad. Written when he was in college, maybe just 20 or 21, before you two even met. To Cynthia's mother. Her name was Annette. Claire choked back another sob. They talk about being young, foolish, about a mistake, about her being pregnant. He talks about responsibility, about his family's expectations, his father's ambitions for him. He couldn't marry her, couldn't acknowledge the child publicly. It wasn't his father's secret. It was Richard's own, a secret daughter conceived in his youth before I ever entered the picture. A daughter he had never acknowledged, yet apparently supported financially, secretly, for her entire life. The story about her being his father's child, the poor relation, another lie, a carefully constructed cover story maintained for over 40 years. The monthly payments weren't fulfillment of a deathbed promise to his father. They were hush money, conscience money, paid to the mother, and then perhaps directly to Cynthia, to keep the secret buried, to maintain his carefully crafted image, his successful career, his perfect family. But why hide it from me, even if it happened before we met? Was it shame? Fear that I wouldn't understand? Fear that it would tarnish the perfect image he cultivated? Or was it simpler? Was it just easier to lie, to compartmentalize, to treat his first daughter and her mother as a hidden account to be managed rather than as human beings. And the gambling, how did that fit in? Did the stress of the lifelong secret, the constant financial drain, fuel the addiction? Or did the addiction, the escalating debts, make the secret payments harder to maintain, creating a vicious cycle of pressure and desperation? Perhaps the gambling started as an escape, a way to feel powerful and in control when his hidden life felt suffocating. "Claire," I said, my own voice hoarse, trying desperately to process the flood of devastating information. "Does it say, in the letters, does it say who knew, besides him and Annette?" "No," Claire sniffled. "It seems like it was just them. He talks about needing to handle it himself, about the impossibility of telling his parents. He sounds young and scared and incredibly selfish, honestly." Selfish. Yes, that resonated. Keeping a secret like that for a lifetime, letting it poison everything. It was profoundly selfish. My phone buzzed again. A text message forwarded from Claire, originating from Mike, the security contact inside. Subject: Cynthia just left the 35th floor via service elevator. Alone, visibly upset, crying. Subject: Richard remains in suite 3512. Alone. So their clandestine meeting hadn't gone well. Cynthia was upset. Why? Had Richard finally confessed the money was gone, gambled away? Had he cut her off? Or had she demanded more, threatening exposure, pushing him further towards the edge? What had happened in that high-roller suite? This tangled mess was far more complex, far more tragic, and far more sordid than I could have possibly imagined. Richard wasn't just a neglectful husband hiding a gambling problem. He was a man haunted by the ghost of a youthful mistake, trapped by a lifelong secret, likely crumbling under the combined weight of hidden paternity, financial obligation, and destructive addiction. His neglect of me, his emotional distance, his obsession with control. Maybe it wasn't entirely indifference towards me. Maybe it was the desperate strategy of a man terrified of his own life unraveling, a man drowning in secrets. Did it excuse his behavior, his lies, his callous disregard for my feelings, for our shared life? Absolutely not. The damage was too deep, the betrayal too profound. But did it explain it? Perhaps. It painted a picture not of simple neglect, but of a deeply fractured man, living a double life built on fear and deception. I needed to talk to him, now. Not in anger, not with the fury that had propelled me here, but with this new, devastating, complex understanding. I needed to look him in the eye and see the man behind the lies, the man who had carried this secret daughter, this hidden life, alongside me for 40 years. I paid the bewildered cab driver, thanking him for his patience, took a deep, steadying breath, smoothing my dress, trying to project an aura of calm I definitely did not feel. And then, squaring my shoulders, I walked towards the glittering, indifferent entrance of the Golden Nugget Casino. My heart pounded, not with simple fury this time, but with a heavy, aching mix of sorrow, apprehension, pity. No, perhaps not pity, just a profound, weary sadness for the waste of it all. Getting up to the high-roller floor required more audacity than I thought I possessed. I walked purposefully towards the private elevators, projecting an air of belonging I didn't feel. When a sleekly dressed security guard moved to intercept me, I feigned confusion, naming a different suite number, pretending to be meeting fictitious friends. He hesitated, distracted for a moment by a call on his radio, and in that instant, I slipped past him and into an ascending elevator, pressing the button for the 35th floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. The doors slid shut, sealing me inside the silent plush capsule, ascending towards the wreckage of my life. I found Richard's suite number, 3512, at the end of a hushed, thickly carpeted corridor. Taking another shaky breath, I knocked softly on the heavy door. Silence. Then, footsteps approaching slowly from within. The door opened a crack. Richard stood there, looking utterly broken. His eyes were red-rimmed, bloodshot. His expensive suit jacket was discarded haphazardly over a chair. His silver hair mussed as if he'd been running frantic hands through it. He stared at me, his face a mask of stunned disbelief and raw exhaustion. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since leaving the house that morning. "Maggie?" he whispered, the name barely audible, thick with disbelief. "How? What are you doing here?" "Can I come in, Richard?" I asked quietly, my voice surprisingly steady. He stepped aside wordlessly, his shoulders slumped, letting me enter the opulent but sterile suite. The air hung heavy with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and despair. An overturned whiskey glass lay on the plush carpet, a dark stain spreading beside it like spilled blood. The sleek black duffel bag sat open and empty on the unmade king-sized bed. He hadn't won. He'd lost whatever cash he'd brought in that bag, and judging by the atmosphere, he'd lost much more than just money tonight. "She knows, doesn't she?" he murmured, not looking at me, sinking onto the edge of the ridiculously large bed, burying his face in his trembling hands. "Cynthia. She knows the money's not what it should be, that it's nearly gone. She threatened to expose everything, the gambling, the lies, the source of her funds, everything." His voice was muffled, choked with despair. "I know about Cynthia, Richard," I said softly, crossing the room to stand before him, not sitting beside him, needing the space. "I know she's your daughter, your secret daughter from before we met." His head snapped up, his eyes wide with fresh, unadulterated shock. He stared at me, as if I'd struck him. "You? Ah, how could you possibly know that?" "It doesn't matter how I know," I said gently, the anger momentarily overshadowed by the sheer, tragic weight of the situation. "What matters is why, Richard. Why didn't you ever tell me? 40 years. 40 years you carried that secret alone. Why?" He looked away, unable to meet my gaze, shame washing over his face in a visible wave. I met you right after Annette told me she wouldn't give her up for adoption, that she expected support. I was young, terrified. My father, he would have disowned me. My career, everything was planned out. Telling you seemed impossible. It would have destroyed everything before it even began." He let out a long, shaky breath, the confession spilling out now like poison drawn from a wound. "And later, after we were married, after Claire was born, it felt even more impossible. It felt like a betrayal of you, of our life. And then the gambling started. Small at first, just stress relief. Then it got out of control. It became easier to hide everything. The secret daughter, the secret addiction, then to admit how badly I'd failed my father's memory in a way. Failed you. Failed Claire. So you let me believe I wasn't enough," I whispered, the old familiar hurt surfacing, sharp and potent despite my resolve. "You let me believe your distance, your secrets, your neglect was somehow my fault, that I was too demanding, too sensitive, too boring. Tears welled in his eyes, spilling freely now, genuine tears of regret, of self-loathing. I know, Maggie. God, I know. I was a coward, ashamed, trapped in a web of my own making. I didn't know how to fix it, how to get out, so I just kept digging the hole deeper. Pushing you away sailed easier, safer than letting you see the absolute mess I'd become. We sat in silence for a long time then, the only sound the distant, muffled chime of slot machines filtering up from the casino floor far below, a soundtrack to our ruined life. The weight of 40 years of secrets, lies, and unspoken pain settled between us, heavy and suffocating. The betrayal was still there, raw and deep, a chasm unlikely ever to be bridged, but beneath it, perhaps obscured by the wreckage, a fragile, complex understanding began to emerge. He wasn't a monster plotting against me. He was a flawed, weak man, broken by secrets and addiction, who had made catastrophically bad choices, hurting everyone around him, perhaps himself most of all. "What happens now, Richard?" I asked finally, my voice flat, devoid of accusation, just seeking clarity in the ruins. He looked up, his eyes pleading, lost. "I don't know, Maggie. I truly don't know. I've lost possibly everything. The money I brought is gone. Cynthia will expose me unless I find more, and there isn't any more. The debts, they're significant, more than you can imagine." He hesitated, his voice cracking. Can you even look at me?" I looked at the man slumped on the bed, the stranger I had lived with, slept beside, built a life with for 4 decades. Hate? No. The initial fury had burned out, leaving behind only the cold ashes of profound sadness and disappointment. "I don't hate you, Richard," I said, and I realized, surprisingly, that it was the honest truth. "But I don't know if I can ever forgive you. The trust is gone, and I certainly can't live like this anymore, waiting for the next lie, the next crisis." He nodded slowly, visibly absorbing the finality of my words, accepting it. There was no argument left in him. "I understand," he whispered. He paused, then asked, his voice barely audible, his greatest fear perhaps reserved for this. "What about Claire? Does she know? About Cynthia? About her being—" "Yes," I said quietly. "She found the letters you wrote to Annette. She knows." He closed his eyes, absorbing another devastating blow. The carefully constructed walls he'd maintained for a lifetime had crumbled completely in a matter of hours. "Richard," I said, my voice firming, finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. "This isn't just about us anymore. You're gambling, these secrets. They could ruin Claire's future too, if Cynthia exposes everything, if creditors come after shared assets. You need to get ahead of this. Now, you need to tell Claire the whole truth about the gambling, the debts, everything. You need to get help for the addiction immediately. And you need to face the consequences of your actions, all of them." He looked at me, his gaze clearing slightly, a flicker of his old resolve, buried deep beneath the shame returning. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're right. I owe Claire the truth, all of it. And I owe myself maybe a chance to try and fix this, if I still can, to stop running." It wasn't a promise of reconciliation. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't even a clear path forward. But maybe, just maybe, it was a start. A painful, messy, uncertain start towards honesty, emerging from the wreckage of 40 years of lie. Getting Richard back home from the gilded cage of the casino felt surreal. like retrieving a fragile, damaged artifact from a shipwreck. He was subdued, almost numb, the explosive confession in the suite seeming to have drained the last vestiges of his fight, his bluster, his carefully maintained control. The looming threat of public exposure by Cynthia, combined with the immediate devastating gambling loss and the seismic shock of his lifelong secret finally being unearthed, had broken something fundamental within him. He seemed smaller, older, infinitely more weary than the vital 71-year-old man who had left for a fishing trip just the day before. The first, most crucial step, we both knew, was telling Claire everything. Not just the fragmented truths she already possessed, the existence of Cynthia, the fact of the gambling, but the whole, unvarnished, ugly picture. The decades of addiction, the true precarious financial state hidden behind a wall of lies, the depth of the potential ruin. We sat her down together that evening, the three of us, in the quiet, familiar living room of our home, my home now, in a way it had never truly felt before. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the comfortable furniture suddenly feeling alien, props on a stage set for a tragedy. Richard spoke haltingly at first, his voice rough, the words catching in his throat like jagged stones. He couldn't meet Claire's eyes, staring instead at his tightly clasped hands, but as he continued, forcing himself to lay bare the ugly chronology, the youthful mistake, the secret daughter, the escalating gamblings, the hidden debts, the lies piled upon lies, a strange transformation occurred. The confession, painful and humiliating as it clearly was for him, seemed to paradoxically liberate him. The carefully constructed facade of the successful patriarch, the prudent advisor, crumbled completely, revealing the vulnerable, flawed, frightened man beneath. He didn't spare himself, didn't make excuses. He simply stated the facts, the anatomy of his secret life. Claire listened in stunned, absolute silence, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief, hurt, and dawning horror. She sat perfectly still, absorbing the blows. When Richard finally fell silent, the confession hanging heavy and raw in the air, she didn't explode in the anger I might have expected, the anger she certainly had a right to feel. She simply turned to him, her voice trembling almost imperceptibly, and asked the question that cut to the heart of it all. Why, Dad? Why didn't you trust us? Why didn't you trust Mom? All these years, we could have helped. I was ashamed, Richard whispered again, the word inadequate but painfully honest, terrified. I started the lies so long ago. They took on a life of their own. I thought you'd both despise me if you knew the truth, that I wasn't the man you thought I was. We're your family, Claire said, the tears finally spilling over, tracking paths down her pale cheeks. We deserved the truth. Mum deserved the truth. And yes, we could have helped. We should have helped, before it got this bad. It was a long, difficult, emotionally draining conversation that stretched late into the night. There were tears. There were moments of sharp recrimination, particularly from Claire as the financial implications began to sink in. But there were also, unexpectedly, moments of quiet grace. Claire, despite her profound shock and personal hurt, showed a strength and maturity that filled me with a fierce, aching pride. She was angry at the lies, devastated by the potential financial ruin that now threatened her own family's stability as well. But she also saw the broken man her father had become, saw the addiction for the disease it was, intertwined with the suffocating weight of the secrets he carried. The immediate crisis remained Cynthia. The threat of exposure was real. Richard, guided now by Claire's clear-headed practicality and my quiet insistence, contacted her the next day. There were no further attempts at deception, no more excuses. He acknowledged the full truth of her parentage, laid bare the depleted state of the funds originally intended for her support, explaining without justification how his gambling addiction had consumed them, and offered what little he could realistically salvage from non-joint assets as a final inadequate settlement. He coupled this with a sincere, if 40 years belated apology for the secrecy, the lies, the way he had handled his obligation. Crucially prompted by Claire, he also made it clear that any attempt on her part to expose him further, to create a public scandal, would inevitably result in him revealing the full context, including his own difficult situation and her apparent acceptance of the secret arrangement over the years. It was another gamble of sorts, banking on her desire to avoid public scrutiny herself. It worked. Cynthia, perhaps realizing her financial leverage was now minimal, and undoubtedly eager to avoid further entanglement or scandal herself, accepted the small settlement with ill grace and thankfully disappeared from our lives, a ghost finally laid partially to rest. The next, much larger, much harder battle was Richard's crippling gambling addiction. There could be no recovery for him, no possibility of rebuilding any semblance of trust or a future, without confronting it head-on. With Claire's firm, unwavering insistence and my quiet agreement, he entered a well-regarded residential treatment program specializing in excessity. It wasn't voluntary enthusiasm on his part. It was acceptance of necessity, the last resort of a man who had... The process was grueling, harrowing. He was forced to confront demons that had haunted him for decades, the underlying causes of his addiction, the devastating impact of his actions. There were setbacks, moments of profound despair, times he wanted to give up. I visited him occasionally, driving the hour to the facility, sitting with him in the sterile visiting room. Not as a wife offering unconditional support, that ship had sailed, but as the mother of his child, as someone who understood, perhaps better than anyone, the devastating power of addiction and secrets. Our conversations were cautious, stilted, focused solely on his recovery program, his therapy sessions, not on us, not on the ruins of our marriage. There was too much wreckage there to even begin sifting through yet. While he was in treatment, Claire and I became an unlikely, efficient team, tackling the financial disaster he had left behind. It was, as I had feared, significantly worse than even the ledger initially revealed. Mountains of debt, hidden high-interest loans, completely depleted retirement accounts, liens I hadn't known existed. A life of quiet, upper-middle-class comfort I thought we possessed was largely an illusion, a house of cards propped up by Richard's increasingly desperate gambles and financial manipulations. We met with lawyers, accountants, debt counselors. Hard decisions had to be made. We had to sell assets, remaining stocks, his beloved vintage car collection, even some furniture. I made the difficult decision to sell the comfortable suburban house we'd lived in for 30 years. Its walls echoed with too many lies, and the equity was needed to pay off the most pressing, dangerous debt. The proceeds vanished like water on sand. When Richard was eventually released from the residential program, months later, looking gaunt but clearer-eyed than I'd seen him in years, there was no grand family home to return to. He diligently continued with outpatient therapy and attended Gamblers Anonymous meetings several times a week. Slowly, painstakingly, day by painful day, he began the arduous process of rebuilding not just his finances, but his life, his integrity. He found a part-time bookkeeping job consulting for a small local charity. Humble work, a far cry from his former glory. He started, haltingly at first, to take genuine responsibility, not just for his addiction, but for the decades of emotional neglect, the gaslighting, the profound damage he had inflicted on me, on Claire. Our relationship remained undefined, suspended in a strange limbo. We weren't husband and wife, not in any real sense. The trust was shattered, perhaps irrevocably. Too much damage had been done, but we communicated, occasionally, honestly, painfully at times. He apologized repeatedly, truly apologized, not just for the gambling and the secrets about Cynthia. The apologies landed somewhere in the vast space between us, acknowledged but not necessarily accepted. Claire became the unwilling but necessary bridge between us. She navigated the complex emotional terrain, supporting her father's fragile recovery while fiercely validating my pain and anger. She learned the hard way to see both of us not as idealized parents, but as flawed, complex human beings capable of great mistakes and perhaps gradual healing. Her own relationship with Richard began to mend, tentatively, built on this new, harsher reality. Did I forgive him? Forgiveness is a complicated, tangled word. I worked hard, mostly successfully, to let go of the burning anger, the consuming bitterness that threatened to poison my own future. I developed over time a measure of compassion for the man I saw trapped by his youthful mistakes and his own destructive demons. But forgetting? No. I felt like a betrayal of myself. The truth I had fought so hard to uncover. The scars remained, faded perhaps, but still there, a permanent part of the landscape of my life. Our story didn't have a simple, happy ending wrapped in a neat Hollywood bow. There was no grand reconciliation, no magical return to the comfortable life we once knew, no erasure of the past. That wasn't possible. That wasn't real. But there was truth, raw, difficult, uncomfortable honesty, a stripping away of decades of illusions. Richard continued his recovery, one day at a time. He worked his humble job, attended his meetings religiously, and tried, in his own quiet, damaged way, to mend the bridges he had burned. He lived alone. He never asked me to take him back, perhaps understanding finally that some things, once broken, cannot be fully repaired. Claire found a new depth, a new honesty in her relationship with both of us, built on the shaky ground of reality rather than the quicksand of facade. She set boundaries, demanded respect, and loved us both with clear eyes. And me, Maggie? I found peace, not in a restored marriage, not in financial security, but deep within myself. I rented a small, sunny apartment filled with plants and books. I continued my rediscovered passion for writing, filling journals with thoughts, poems, observations. I took that pottery class I'd always dreamed of, finding a profound satisfaction in shaping clay, creating beauty from simple earth. I traveled modestly, reconnected with old friends Richard had subtly pushed away, made new ones who valued me for who I was, not for who my husband was. I lived my life, finally, unequivocally, on my own terms. The hidden ledger hadn't just revealed Richard's secrets. It had, in a strange, painful, and ultimately liberating way, revealed me to myself. It forced me to confront the compromised life I had accepted for far too long, and empowered me to choose a different one, a smaller life perhaps by conventional standards, but a truer life, a life where I was visible, a life where I was, finally, enough.